Reflections in Time is made possible in part by support from the UNO Alumni Association, fostering a legacy of alumni giving since 1913.
Good afternoon. My name is Del Weber. I'm Chancellor Emeritus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. I served in the position as Chancellor for 20 years, from 1977 to 1997. We're sitting on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha today in the studios of KVNO, and I'm sitting here with my old friend and colleague, Dr. Otto Bauer. Otto, welcome.
Thank
you. Good to have you here. It's good to be able to simply reminisce about old times, and that's what we're going to do today. But before we do that, Otto, I want to ask you, what are you doing now these days?
Well, these days I'm continuing to work on a book that I call Essays on Trust and Distrust. That's keeping me busy. And I've taken up mediation work. I'm a volunteer mediator for the Johnson County Small Claims Court. And that's an interesting experience because there's every kind of a mediation you can think of that comes before that group.
Oh, I'll bet. Well, you know, that's that's an area of interest that you've had for a long time, ever since I've known you.
Yes.
And I can't think of anything much more important for an administrator than to be able to understand trust.
And it seems like I was doing a lot of mediation with the faculty as well.
I know you were. I know you were. You know, I want to say something to whoever might be viewing this in the future, who may not, in fact, very few would know this. But as you remember, Otto, you were offered, or you were not offered, but you were a candidate at the same time I was for the chancellorship of the University of Nebraska at Omaha.
Yes.
And there were those who tried to talk me out of hiring you as the academic vice chancellor because they thought that that would lead to some problems, heartache. And I suspect that there's some reason that they might have thought that in witnessing other situations like that. But I just want to tell you today, and I want to tell whoever is listening, that hiring you never created any kind of a problem, and I suspect it's one of the very best decisions that I ever made as chancellor of this campus. So it's just great to be able to sit here and talk with you today.
Well, I appreciate your comments, Del, very much so. I can remember the day I came for the interview, I stuck my head in the door and said, "Do you know what I know?" And you said, "Yes, I do." And I said, "Does that make a difference to you?" And you said, "It's more important whether it makes a difference to you."
Yes.
And I said, "I'm not that kind of a person."
No. And
it
you
doesn't make a difference.
We had a great time. Before we reminisce a little bit about our days on campus, I'd like to have you tell us a little bit about your days at Berkeley as an ACE intern, because I think that's such a fascinating period of your life.
Well, I was at Bowling Green State University when the administration there nominated me for the American Council on Education internship program. So I became an ACE fellow, and it was at the Berkeley campus. Berkeley was, of course, a very troubled campus, starting in 1964 with the free speech movement, knew Mario Savio.
Yes.
I had occasion to meet with him twice while I was there at Berkeley. There was the People's Park incident in 1969, and we also had to deal with the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, the Black Panthers. Perhaps this brings back some
Yes.
of your own memories of those times. There were some troubled students at that time who produced humorous events as well. You know, the first day that I was on campus, we came walking out of the faculty club where we had lunch, and here was a couple of young people playing Frisbee, which normally isn't any problem, but they were stark naked.
I remember this.
Not a stitch of clothes on. And I remember the vice chancellor at Berkeley saying to me, "Now, I'm going to teach you an administrative decision right now. We can walk down this way, which will walk us by them, and then people will expect us to do something. But we can take this other path, and we won't have to do anything. And so he said, let's take the path less traveled.
And you said, no, I want to confront the issue right here and now.
No, I took his advice. I remember one day we were in the office and we got a call that a young fellow was threatening to commit suicide, jumping off the balcony on Bolt Law School. And the Vice Chancellor and I rushed down there to see what was happening. There were about 200 students down there, all saying, "Don't jump, what's the matter?" And the word came down that what was the matter was that he said no woman would sleep with him. And a young gal in the audience raised her hand and said, "Oh hell, I'll do it." And so the word got up to the young fellow on the balcony, and he climbed over the railing off the balcony and said, "Fine." Came down and went out. The two of them walked off into the crowd. The next day in the morning, this fellow was back on campus. He had on what do they call them, a sandwich board?
Yes.
And it was hung on the front and the back of him, and he had a sign on there saying, "I want to be bald." And the police came out there and bundled him up with his sandwich board and himself and threw him off campus. And I heard the one policeman say to him, "Look, we got it for you one time, but now you're on your own." And we don't ever want to see your face on this campus again. And so far as I know, he never showed up again.
Those are wonderful stories. I know you could sit here and weave those stories by the hour, but I think that's an appropriate story to move to talk about, reminiscing about UNO.
Okay.
You know, you came here in '79, and you left the vice chancellorship in '95, was it, or '94? '94. '94. And then you continued to profess, and by the way, I've been told that you were kind of like a Pied Piper on the campus as a teacher. Your students followed you all around during those years. But what I want to ask you about, and what I want to talk about, is the changes that we both saw in higher education, generally, but more importantly and specifically within the University of Nebraska system and UNO, over that period of, let's say, 17 to 20 years that we worked together very closely. Let me just give you an example, and I'm not just talking here about physical kinds of things, but I'm talking about faculty attitudes, regental views about this campus, a number of kind of things. And let me just kick it off by telling you one that I remember of how much has changed, that I probably would know more about than you would in this case. When I came to Omaha, in 1979, the University of Nebraska Foundation kicked off its first capital campaign. They were going to raise $25 million. Now think about that, because the last campaign they had a goal, I believe, of $250 million. So, you know, it's come a long way. But in those days, that was considered to be big money. And that campaign was so successful, they raised $52 million. Today, anyway, and if you looked at the breakdown of this, as I recall it, I could be wrong a little bit about these figures, about half of that money came out of the city of Omaha, and about half came from Lincoln and then the rest of the world. But when the distribution was made, the University of Nebraska-Lincoln got the lion's share. I remember this campus got something around $2 million, and the medical center somewhere around $4 million. Now, that wasn't really the foundation trying to be discriminatory, particularly, but it was also an attitude in Omaha that where you gave your money was to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, not here. And I remember talking with what's now Wells Fargo Bank, but at that time was Norwest Bank, and the major victory, winning a major victory of having them agree to give half of their money to Omaha and half of it to Lincoln. So that was one kind of change. I can tell you today that's not the way it is at the University of Nebraska Foundation anymore.
Well, back in those days, the land-grant institutions all across the country were calling the shots.
Yes.
You know, the Minnesotas, the Illinois, the Michigans.
Right.
They were calling the shots. And enrollment was growing at such a rapid rate that they were having trouble hiring enough faculty, and so salaries started to increase for faculty. And the admissions or the GI Bill, for example, had all kinds of people coming back to school.
Yes.
The number of women who began to participate in higher education began to change dramatically.
Yes.
I know at UNO we had something like 35% of our students were women, and not very long later there was over 50%.
Yes. Finally, they finally there were more women. I suspect it's still true today. More women than men.
Yes, I think that's the case. And then of course Title IX came along, and they had to begin treating women athletics with the same power as they're treating male athletics, and that is still being pursued.
Yes. Right.
And on some campuses they're doing better than they are on other campuses.
Yeah. I think you're inferring there, without mentioning it specifically, that one of the things that happened in the post-World War II era was this tremendous expansion of the American university.
Oh yes.
The San Marcos of the world, the Poughkeepsies, the Stony Brooks,
yes.
Across this country. And so that the land-grant institutions lost a lot of ground because of this.
Yeah, the land grants were used as the model.
Yes.
And so everybody thought they had to have a full slate of doctoral
yes.
programs and a full schedule of research activities.
Right. Yes. Yes. You know, when I went to Arizona State University in 1962, it was 13,000 students. That was in 1962. 40 years later, it's 50,000. You know,
yeah.
And growing, with now 3 campuses. So.
When I started at Bowling Green, there were 8,000 students. Now they have over 17,000 students.
Yeah.
And they've been under an enrollment cap, or they would have many, many more.
Yes. Yeah. Let's talk about it at this campus level. What did you, from the time you came here, maybe it might be instructive to start with first impressions about whatever as you came to the campus, and then how you saw things change over a period of time.
Well, one of the reasons that I came here to start with was that I saw an institution that was, relatively speaking, a comprehensive institution. It had a wide range of programs, and given the campus I had been on before, which was the University of Wisconsin Parkside campus, where there was a huge level of distrust between the faculty and the administration, so much so that I regarded it as insurmountable. I didn't see that when I came here, but I saw one problem that seemed to persist right from the start, and that was the decision by the faculty to unionize.
Yes.
And I can remember walking down the campus and seeing Paul Borghi, who used to work here in television and also in the communications department, and asking Paul, how are you going to vote on the union? And he said, oh, I'm voting for the union. I said, you are not serious. You really think that you're going to get more money than Lincoln gets? He said, oh, no, but he said, when they divide up the money here, I'll get more. And he was absolutely
right.
He was right.
He was right about that.
He was absolutely right. Yes. So I was concerned about the unionization, but and I understand the first contract that you get in unionization is the hardest one to come by, and we worked awfully hard getting that yes. first contract. But once we got it kind of nailed down and settled down, I think that there were some positives that came out of the unionization. Yes,
I do too. I do too. I don't think there was any question about that. I think much of the rancor left. I think it even took care of some distrust.
Yes.
You know, when we came to the campus, frankly, what the faculty were upset about was the merit issue. And as I came to understand that issue, I agree that I'd have been striking too.
You know, it's interesting. I was working for the North Central Accreditation body, and UNO came before the committee that I was on for their accreditation. And Herb Garfinkel came to the committee. That's the first I had no idea that I would someday
replace him.
Yes. But I remember their coming into the meeting, and I remember this committee saying to Herb Garfinkel, you better straighten out that merit system or you're going to unionize that campus. And he said, but the merit system we have is one that was approved by the faculty.
Yeah.
And when later on, when I got here, how many years later, I discovered that it was approved by the faculty, but it wasn't carried out the way it was. The way it was approved.
Well, yes. Plus, the other problem was the presumption, I'm sure, on the part of the faculty when they agreed to it was that there would be a sufficient pot of money after a board, across-the-board increases to provide merit.
Yes.
But there never was. And you know as well as I, there were faculty who were embarrassed about going in for merit increases because they were, they were getting these huge increases of 12, 15, 16%. While their colleagues were getting less than average, and they simply refused to be a part of that.
There was an agreement of a certain amount that would go to merit and a certain amount would go across the board.
Yeah.
When the regents changed that, then all of a sudden the dollars that were supposed to go across the board were channeled into just a few faculty members.
Yes.
That will unionize the faculty overnight.
Yeah. I think, it would be very interesting to know. I've never talked with any of the principals of that, but it would be very interesting to know what lay behind that, because to me, it obviously was a star system. They were going to try to wrench around the faculty to the stars.
That reminds me, when I was at University of Wisconsin Parkside, my predecessor on that campus set as his objective instant greatness. And he had 3 piles of faculty manila folders. One pile was instantly great. Another pile was there's some hope. Another pile was they're going to be discharged. And he was in the process of firing over 30 faculty when the substance hit the fan.
Oh boy, yes.
And not a single faculty member was fired, but the vice chancellor and the dean were fired.
Yeah, yes. Yes, it really was kind of amazing. What else did you notice about those changes in that period of time?
Well, I think that the programming really began to change. I know the first programming that I went after was the general education programming of the campus. And in the process also went after admission standards. Because I think that because of the Vietnam War, there had been a softening of admission standards and a softening of general education requirements, which I thought was having an effect upon the quality of institutions.
Yes.
But there was an important factor here at UNO that I didn't really understand till I was here and saw it for a while. And that was the effect that the bootstrap program had upon this campus.
Yes.
The Air Force was trying to develop a degreed officer corps. And so there were a large number of officers from the Air Force who were on this campus who had their tuition paid for, their books paid for, were drawing a full salary, and were given the motivation of you do well or we're chopping you off, cutting you off from this program. And these were sophisticated men that had been around the world and served in various locations, throughout the world. And they brought quality to the classroom and challenge to I could see where the high school graduates who came into the program felt intimidated having people of this caliber competing with them. They said they were all a bunch of curve busters.
Yes. They were interested and serious about their studies.
And what amazed me on this campus was that after the bootstrappers were really satisfied and they had a degreed officer corps, just about that time women started to come back into higher education. And they took the place of the bootstrapper. They would only take 1 or 2 courses because that's all they could break away for, but they would do the reading.
Yes.
Prepare the papers ahead of time and work over them. Actually study for tests in advance.
Unheard of.
Not have everything as a last minute cramming.
Yes.
And they became just as much a threat to the high school graduate coming into this campus as the bootstrappers were.
Yeah.
But it's meant, I think, that the quality of education on the campus was really quite superior, and I didn't feel like I had to do anything about that. All we had to do was do some streamlining on the programs. The general education program, for example, needed streamlining. We had a general education program. There was each college had it, but it wasn't the same. There wasn't a university-wide standard.
And they were entitled to do that by the the statutes of the university. That's not quite.
That's right. Well, it puts each faculty in charge of the degree program that they're offering.
Right.
And so you had students transferring from one college to another, and all of a sudden picking up another set of requirements.
Yes.
And also the campus had some doctoral programming already. There was a great deal of cooperation going on with the Lincoln campus and the medical center in the field of psychology, because they both had doctoral programming in those areas, and they allowed us to participate with them, which was important for the campus in terms of its own confidence and prestige. And I began to look at that and say we need to find a way to expand that on the campus to more fully establish the university quality that we have on this campus. And the place where we decided to move, I say we, but it wasn't me, was in the areas in which we had statewide responsibility. That is, this one university concept that they have in Nebraska assigned certain programs, medical programs obviously to the medical center, the agricultural programs to the Agricultural Institute, and a host of other programs to the major land grant. And then along came this metropolitan campus with asking, where is this place in the sun? Does it have to stand in the shade all the time? And we looked at the mission areas that we have, which are public administration, gerontology, criminal justice, and social work. And we said these are areas to try to make a move in, to do something for the level of prestige of the campus, to show that it's arrived. And at the same time, not engage in unnecessary duplication.
Yes.
Because the regents and the legislature would not have allowed that.
Yeah. I think you're forgetting a little strategy of that, though, because it wasn't just those programs. We sat down and we decided to put together a multi-front approach to this.
Yes.
And we said one of the reasons that it would be very difficult to, for example, oppose a joint doctorate in educational administration, because we were training more of the doctoral students than Lincoln was at the time. So we proposed that as an alternative.
Yes.
And then the other one we proposed as an alternative was the information technology doctorate. That was before we even had a College of Information Science and Technology.
That's right.
But we recognized that was coming.
Yes.
And so we wanted to be, in effect, that provision or that strategy was to give us kind of a carte blanche, whatever came down the pike, to be able to add those doctorates.
Yes.
And so we really went forward thinking, well, if we don't get this one, we're going to get something out of this. And you might want to talk about the whole authority, the plan.
Yeah, there's two other things that happened there that I thought we took advantage of. One was we said that we should go forward with an entitlement to plan.
Yes. Because
you could plan all these programs and get to the regents and have them say no.
Yes.
And you would have wasted tons of faculty time and energy.
Well, and can I just interrupt?
Sure.
Because I think the faculty, some of them, were very reluctant to plan because they didn't feel we could pull that off anyway. And they were going to go to all this work.
Right, and they also didn't want the money used for that siphoned off from their current program.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So they weren't enthusiastic about the idea.
Yeah.
So we had to kind of cope with that as we went along.
Yes.
But the notion of we said, let's go to the board and ask for entitlement to plan. And if we ask for entitlement to plan like an education where we already have most of the students, if we ask for entitlement to plan in the areas in which we have statewide responsibility, it should be kind of difficult for them to say no.
Yes. Yeah.
And then at the same time, there was a change in presidential leadership in the system. And there was quite a struggle that occurred among the regions and the faculty and the 3 or 4 candidates that they had for the presidency.
And the chancellors.
And the chancellors. Yes, that's for sure. And when Martin Massengale was appointed president, I think we sat back and said, you know, now might be the time to come forward with an entitlement to plan.
Yes.
Because he's not fully rooted in his position yet.
That's right.
And then maybe
he wouldn't be able to stop it, and he didn't.
You're right.
Yes. That, and if you remember, I think it was either shortly before or after we got our doctoral programs approved, the Lincoln Journal ran an editorial talking about how the UNO administration had moved into a vacuum.
Yes.
And it was this old brick by brick kind of stuff, you know.
Yeah.
It was always,
you know, that's interesting. Then when we moved to Omaha, the very first dinner that I attended down in Lincoln, all I heard that whole night was brick by brick, brick by brick.
Yes.
The university's moving to Omaha.
Yes. Well, you know, that reminds me, when I first came to Omaha, I had dinner one evening with Leo Daly, who was not the present Leo Daly, but the man who really built the Leo Daly Company. And he said, Del, I'll give the campus $4 million if you can bring engineering back to Omaha. I said, it's not politically possible. I would have loved to have done that, but I said, it's not politically possible. And it would take a whole lot more than $4 million to do that anyway. That was the end of the conversation. A few weeks later, he asked me to have dinner with George Abel, who was a part of the O Street gang in Lincoln, head of a construction outfit in Lincoln, former Cornhusker All-American. And we sat at dinner, and at one point Leo Daly said to George Abel, George, why don't we move engineering back to Omaha? After all, that's where the students are at. That's where the engineering needs are at. And I'm going to leave out the expletives. But George Abel said, that college will be moved over my dead body. And that's how serious that business was.
Yes.
So it's kind of...
Yes.
By the way, the doctoral programs were approved in the early 90s.
Right.
Now, let's go back 10 years to show, because we started this by talking about the changes that took place. Do you remember the time that you and I were asked to come to a closed session of the board? I don't know if it was closed session, but there was no one there other than just staff. And they had asked each campus to tell them what we would do if we had 3% extra money beyond our budgetary needs.
Yes.
And you remember we talked about the fact that what we would do is to create and develop a DBA, a Doctor of Business Administration. I don't think we any more than got that out of our mouth. And we were told, don't even mention it, or you're going to be out of here. I mean,
yes.
They weren't about to listen to that.
That's right.
So the fact that 10 years later, it shows you how time changed, because we were able then to move some things through.
Well, it took 10 years to soften them up.
Yes.
To be responsive. It really did.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. And they did. Well, let's talk a little bit. Well, let me ask you first of all, are there any faculty from that period who you think about? I can tell you a couple that again I remember so vividly, because I think it was kind of in the early period of UNO. Do you remember how we as a planning staff would sit around and there were certain people, at least, who were very, very concerned among that group about our spending of $1 here or $5 here because of Professor Petrosky,
Yes.
who would keep a very close eye on this, and he really knew more about the budget than probably anybody in the university.
Right.
But you remember that?
See, I wasn't here when Petrosky was at his strength.
Okay. So you missed that.
But what I didn't miss is I would pass him on campus and I would say hello to him and he would just grunt at me.
Was that the only one?
He was a tough cookie.
Yes, he was a tough cookie. But he watched the dollars very, very carefully. Well, anyway, we're about half, if you can imagine, we're halfway through an hour here. So I want to kind of change the topics.
All right.
You know, we, during the time we served together, I counted, and I think there were 17 regents with whom we worked. I may have missed one or two, but I think 17. We worked with 5 different chancellors at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln during our years together, and 3 chancellors of the medical center. So
ours was the only door that wasn't revolving.
Yes. So we had some longevity here, and interestingly enough, we had it among a number of people, and that was, I think, really one of the advantages we had as a campus, that people came and they stayed, and they produced. But I want to mention some regents' names to you, and just tell me what you think of. I mean, just quickly. Now, if there's a person or 2 or 3 you want to expand on, that's fine, but I don't want to lecture, and I'm not going to give you one about these. Kermit Hansen.
Kermit Hansen was a man who wanted so badly to be influential in a first-class regent. He worked at it. He would call after a meeting and say, "You did a good job today."
Yes.
He was the only regent that did that.
Yes. He was the only regent who sat in 200 classes. 200.
That's right.
Isn't that amazing?
Then he would come by my office and report to me about how the classes went, and he was amazed, for example, that our students were dressed so well compared to the Lincoln students.
Yes.
And I told him, I said, most of our students have jobs. And so they can't just come in their shower clogs.
Yes.
They have to be dressed appropriately.
Yeah.
He was impressed. He noticed this.
He was a very reasonable man and a very good regent. Here's one I know you'll want to talk about a little bit more at length. Regent Bob Sims from Scotts Bluff.
He was something special. I was helped by Elaine Hess and John Farr tremendously in my relationships with Bob Simmons. They told me he loves to argue. And if you're a worthy adversary, he will love you. They said Herb Garfinkel was a worthy adversary, and you have to carry on that tradition. So the first year that we were here at Thanksgiving time, he showed up at our door here in Omaha.
At your home, you mean?
At the home, yes. He had a daughter or son who lived in the area, and he was out for a walk, and he saw our place, and he just came up to the front door. And he worked me over for a good hour or two on one university concept and how we were supposed to fall in line and do things that were appropriate for Lincoln and not for Omaha. And what was interesting is that my wife had been listening to this from the next room. And she came in and said, "Can I say something?" And he was obviously uncomfortable that the spouse was interjecting. And I was a little uncomfortable myself, what's she going to say? And she said to him, "Why can't you treat the university like we treat our children? We want each one of them to have an opportunity to grow and develop. Seems like that would be fair to do with the university."
Yes.
And it really slowed him down.
Yes. Maybe we should have had Jeanette come and give that talk to all the regents. So
probably would have helped out.
Yeah.
One time he called me aside at a regent meeting and said, "If I have $500,000 for you."
You better speak up a little bit so they hear the
"If I have $500,000 for you, what would you do?" I said, "Where did you get the $500,000? He said, "That's irrelevant." I said, "No, it's not irrelevant.
Yes.
Is it 500,000 I already have, or is it 500,000 that the medical center or the Lincoln campus has?" He said, "It's in your athletic program."
Yes.
I said, "I'm not interested." "You're not interested?" He said, "Come on out in the hall." he took me out in the hall and started berating me, and I said, "Can I ask you a question?" He said, "Yes." I said, "How'd you ever get such a nice wife?" And he said, "You asked the wrong question."
Yes.
You're not supposed to ask how I got her, it's how I keep her.
Yes. Well, I can tell you my story about Bob Simmons is when I came to the university, had accepted the job, had met with the press, we're having lunch, came out afterwards, he was late, never came to the lunch, came up to me and said, "I'm Bob Simmons. I hope the president of this university has told you that there's one regent who doesn't happen to think you're necessary." That was my introduction to my new job.
Oh, boy.
So,
Rob, he was a tough cookie.
Yeah, Rob Ron.
I would, if I were scoring the regents on who is I thought was the best one that we had, it was Rob Ron.
Yes, he was very good.
He was just excellent.
Superman, in all sense of the word. Rosemary Scrupa, I have to tell you about her, you know, because I became very close to her because she was such a supporter. When she came to she was a very controversial member of the Omaha Public Power District Board. And when I read in the paper that she was running for regent, it scared me to death. And one day she came to my office and she sat down in front of me, across me, just like this, and she said, "Do you know who I am?" I said, "Yes, I know who you are." And she said, "Well, I want to tell you something. I'm not the Wicked Witch of the East. And if I'm elected, I'm going to be in your corner all the way." And she always was, you know. It was really kind of amazing. So, Don Blank.
Don Blank. I didn't have very many opportunities to work with Don Blank. I think that you had.
Yes, he was. Don was very supportive of this university and continues to be. He's still there. You know, it's interesting.
Yes.
And he's running for his 4th term now, which would make 24 years. Amazing. John Payne, very supportive of this campus, I think, and the things we were trying to do. Nancy Hoke.
It was kind of interesting when, after Nancy was elected to Regents, she ran for the Senate to represent the state of Nebraska in the nationals, in the federal Senate. And I thought I would contribute a few dollars to her campaign to show some support, because she was new and so forth. I think I contributed $50. And when I signed my name, instead of signing it Otto Bauer, because she was from the county of Otto, I signed it Otto Bauer. And from then on, every time I got mail, and I got tons of mail, it was all addressed to Otto Bauer.
Really?
So somehow my name got, you could tell every place where it showed up.
That's interesting.
And that was probably, somehow that happened through Nancy.
Yes. Well, she was a formidable regent. She also later became a formidable advocate for the development of Nebraska City. So she's a very interesting person. Regent Schwarzkopf.
The greatest memory I have of Regent Schwarzkopf is when Wally Bacon, a professor in our political science area, received a Kellogg Foundation fellowship, and I was proud of his receiving this fellowship, so I mentioned it in a report to the board. And Regent Schwarzkopf said, what is this fellowship about? I said, well, it's about the movement of the electorate from the farms to the city. He said, well, that's agricultural issue, and that should be handled by the Agricultural Institute in Lincoln. You should turn down that fellowship.
Yes.
I said, no, you can't tell a faculty member that he has to stop thinking about something, and he's got the academic freedom to think about what he wants to think about.
Yes.
Regent Schwarzkopf said, did you say academic freedom? Are you bringing that up in this meeting? I said, yes. He said, then I have nothing further to say.
Yes.
And I walked to the back of the room and lamented what was going on, and Regent Bob Prokop got up out of his seat and walked to the back of the room and stood next to me. And he said, Vice Chancellor Bauer, did I hear you use the words academic freedom in this meeting today? I said, yes, sir. He said, pack your bags.
Yes. Isn't that?
Now, he never...
No, but
He never...
it told you about their understanding, really, of what a university is.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting. That's one of the great things about a democracy and public education, you know, that people of all ilk are able to be elected, and it all turns out for the
Bob
best.
Brokop would support us
Yes.
in our issues. Regent Schwarzkopf, he would support us, but only after it was kind of cleared through Lincoln.
Yes. He was very...
he was a Lincoln regent.
Yes, really was. Very much so. You know, Bob Prokop, what I remember about him, I think he was harmless, but he always assumed, for the most part at least, in regental meetings, a prosecutorial demeanor.
Yes.
And it literally was true that after he left the board, our regents' meetings lasted about 1 hour less. Because he would get people, for whatever reasons, ask that they come to the regents' meetings, and he would begin to question them. And it was tough questioning. And I never understood in a lot of those cases what the agenda was. But it was a difficult situation for whoever was in that seat.
Yes.
So, I want to lump two together, not because they saw eye to eye on anything, but because it's going to trigger something in your mind. Don Fricke and Bob Allen. Remember the fine arts discussion of the building?
Oh, I remember the discussion where they were opposed to the building, and one of the questions was, how are you going to be able to vacuum the carpeting with a curved wall?
Yes, the concern was it was going to increase operational costs because you were going to have special cleaning equipment. Oh, I tell you. The other one that with Regent Allen, I remember his asking Malcolm Holtzman, the New York architect, because he was so opposed to those wavy walls. He said to the architect, tell me, has there ever been another architect in this country who's designed wavy walls? And Holtzman looked at him and said, yes, sir. He said, there's a man, probably the most famous architect in this country. And Allen said, who is that? He said, Thomas Jefferson.
Right.
And then as that discussion continued about the angles of this building, the architect said, why don't you look at the ceiling of the room you're sitting in? Do you think this is a square room? Because I think they all thought it was, and of course it wasn't. So it's much more pentagonal in shape, you know.
Yes.
So anyway, that was an interesting thing. We had interesting regents, and some of them first rate, some of them quite good, some less good. But I didn't see any of them, maybe with an exception or two, that were mean-spirited about it. They just were trying to do their best to serve the university and the citizens of the state.
Yes.
So, okay, well, let's move away from the regents a little bit. We talked about doctoral programs and some of the strategy there. Let's talk a little bit about aviation.
Yep, that was interesting because we took the opposite approach on aviation than we took on the entitlement to plan.
Yes.
We said that if we felt that if we bared our objectives too early on aviation, that we wouldn't get anywhere. That we better get it planned and get it all taken care of before we go to the regents and run the risk of their turning us down.
Yes.
But if we have key money supporters in the program, when they ask the question, how is this going to be paid for, and we can answer with these moneyed people from Omaha, that they would be hard put to say no to the program.
Yes.
So we did the opposite. Instead of getting entitlement to plan, we engaged in secrecy.
We announced it. Well, you've got to be flexible.
And I recall, you perhaps recall that meeting we had it was over at ConAgra. It was with Walter Scott, Chuck Durham, and Mike Harper.
Yes.
And Mike Harper was absent from most of the meeting because he was busy negotiating with Nabisco or someone.
Yes.
And we asked them for $4.5 million, as I recall. And they said, we won't give you $4.5 million, but we'll guarantee $400,000 a year for
Yes.
4 or 5 years.
Yes. Yeah.
And once we had that commitment, and we brought the program to the regions, and they unanimously approved the program.
Yes. You probably weren't as disturbed about that meeting as I was, because their statements early on would let us to believe money's no problem. As generous as that is to provide it for 5 years, it gave us some problems.
Yes.
In terms of how are you going to, after 5 years, find that money?
Yes.
So that really concerned me a great deal. And then the other one that concerned me a lot about it was that we'll raise the money. But they didn't, totally. And I remember having to ask John Gottschalk, the editor of the World Herald, the publisher, and for some money for I think it was $200,000, I can't remember exactly. And he looked at me and he said, Dell, is this your highest priority on that campus? And I said, well, it's one of the high priorities. He said, no, that's not what I'm asking you. Is this your highest priority for this campus? I said, yes, it is. He said, okay, I'll do it. But it was very uncomfortable.
Very uncomfortable.
Because, Chuck Durham raised almost all of it, but not totally. And so, you had to get into it yourself, which I guess is no more than you should expect.
Yes, I remember sitting in on some meetings with Chuck personally when he was trying to talk people into donating.
Yes.
And some were more generous than others.
Yes. Yeah. He worked very hard at that.
Yeah.
And he deserves a lot of credit, as you should, for what I think is, and we want to talk about this in a little different context in a moment, but because it's turned out to be such a really fine program.
Well, that program, having the blessings of the leadership of Omaha and the leadership of UNO, and having its first director of the Institute, Bill Shea, who was a dynamo of energy.
Yes.
in public relations. People would say that when he drove on the campus, you could tell that he had arrived.
Yes. Oh, yes. That's correct.
And if only he would have stayed with us for longer than 2 years, it would have helped. But
yes.
They used to laughingly call Bill the Ricochet.
Yes.
Because he would stay with the job probably about 2 years, and then he would move on to another job.
Well, I think Bill Shea probably understood as well as any person I've ever met his own limitations.
Yes.
Because that's what he could do. He could energize, he could get people excited about something for 2 years, but the fact of the matter is he wasn't going to build a sustainable program. That's not who he was. That wasn't his personality.
But when he went to talk to the faculty senate about the program, they applauded.
Oh, yes.
They never applauded anybody for anything.
No, I know. That's how good he was. He was really, but he was a Pied Piper too.
That's right.
He really was.
But then we knew we had to bring someone in who would establish the academic authority of that program.
Yes.
And Brent Bowen, to his credit, has done that.
Yeah. We've got probably 10 minutes left. Let's just kind of switch the topic. What would you? Here we are. We're sitting here, October 20th, 2004. We're 4 years from moving into now a new century of the existence of this institution. You're a has-been. I'm a has-been. We really know nothing about the university and its operations today. We might think we do, but it's moved beyond us.
Right.
But if you were looking at it and you were to say, if I had something to say about this university, here's what I'd be doing now, what would those kind of things be doing?
I think the first thing I would be doing would be exploiting the mission responsibilities that we have in the state. Because if you're given a task to perform and you don't perform it, it's very hard to then get additional authorities. So those programs that are in CPACs, along with what we call ICE-T, the Information Technology Program, are key programs that have to continue their development and their strengthening, because we have state responsibility in those programs. So those would be the ones that I would say, first of all, that we need to, before we start with new programs, we need to take the responsibilities that we have and meet those.
Mm-hmm.
Then I would also, it's time, I think, to look again at admission requirements and general education requirements. Because if we aren't careful about that, we are going to affect the quality of the institution.
Yes.
Those are two key elements of quality for our campus. Who comes in the door and what you require them to do.
Yes. Well, you know, and we've seen already what the admission requirements that were instituted in 1997 have done in terms of retention.
They've had an impact.
Had an impact, yes. That's right. So, is that it?
That's it. Maybe
right.
Maybe you have some
Well,
more.
I guess I'd come at it a little differently, although I agree with everything you're saying. But I guess if I were looking at this, I'd figure out ways, maybe this is called scheming, but I'd figure out ways to put together a plan to integrate UNO and the medical center, to bring them together.
Good
You know,
thought.
if you,
Good thought.
you know, and it may not be possible, but if you drive from here, we're 18 blocks in effect from the medical center. And when I look at what happened at Birmingham, Alabama, when they put the medical school there and the campus there together, when I see what's happened on the Chicago Circle campus by doing that,
Yes.
and there may be other examples, I'm sure there are, it simply makes a lot of sense. And it makes a lot of sense in terms of a strapped economy and a strapped state that, or a state that's strapped for funds. And that's not going to change. There are, you know, huge structural problems in this state, and I think that could be a very wise thing for them to do, and particularly when we have now the nexus with the Exarban campus sitting there, and the Med Center also interacting, and that IS&T program. There obviously have to be synergies there between the whole biomedical business and the IS&T.
Well, it's a particularly a good thought, I think, because Omaha itself kind of represents an entrepreneurial spirit.
Yes.
It's one of the things that I've loved about Omaha.
Yes.
Is it's on the make all the time.
Yeah. Yes, and you know, I think that's the other thing as I think about the future. What I would be doing, I'd figure out what that is. It's the kind of things you've been talking about, and I'd be talking to every one of these entrepreneurs and trying to get them to come aboard to help us build that vision. And I think probably a lot of that's being done anyway. But you know, as we sit here and talk about it without knowing that, I think that's really something that makes a lot of sense to do, as does your whole emphasis on the academics of the situation. Well, you know, Otto, I think we've got about 2-3 minutes left. And I'd like to just take a couple of minutes to talk about, and I want to leave faculty out of this, but some unforgettable characters you've met on this campus. And I want to talk about them too.
Some of those unsung heroes?
Unsung heroes, yes.
Well, I mean, some of the names that come to my mind immediately on the staff are Jim Leslie.
Yes.
And Tim Fitzgerald. Elaine Hess. John Farr. Harvey Levitt.
Yes. Yes.
There would be several more that I could name.
Oh, yes. Yes.
These are people that have given of themselves.
Yes.
Beyond call.
Yes. I agree with you, by the way, on all of those. I think that I've often said that, you know, these are the people who make the core. And they come, they stay, they create through their work, through who they are, an atmosphere about what this university stands for, what it is. And when I think of the work of Jim Leslie and his association with this institution over the last 38 years, or with Tim Fitzgerald, I don't know how long Tim's been here, But Tim is a fixture, and he's a very talented fixture on this campus. And those kind of people are the kind of people who make an institution what it is. They give it the atmosphere, the camaraderie, all of those kind of things.
Dell, to your credit, you helped draw those people into this institution and keep them.
Well, I appreciate that. We worked Otto as a team, and,
Yep.
we really did. I can't imagine, I'm sure there are other cases of that and people who feel that way, but I think really that we come as close as you could come to being a team in the best sense of that word, where we were thinking pretty much alike on almost all issues, and we were scheming to make something happen.
Right.
And I don't mean that in a bad sense of the word, but in a good sense, that we had great times, and we have fond memories, as is evident by this last hour that we're here today. And so again, I want to thank you for all your contributions that you made to this institution. You're one of those unsung heroes also to me. So with that, I think we'll wrap this up.
All right.
Call it an hour.
Thank you for a great experience.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Reflections in Time is made possible in part by support from the UNO Alumni Association, fostering a legacy of alumni giving since 1913.